Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. This is our monthly OpenNTF webinar. Today we're covering XPages topic with Michael Smith, and something he looks like he devoted a lot of time in creating a new view control that looks pretty cool to me. So we're going to all learn more about it. Just a little housekeeping. My name's Howard Greenberg, and on the line with me is Graham Akers and Jesse Gallagher, and they'll help me today hosting this webinar. And then we have Michael Smith on here from Mutual RE. So a little bit about, just find the right thing there. Okay, so that's our agenda. So we're going to cover questions at the end. So the way you're going to ask questions is you'll use the GoToWebinar questions pane that's on the screen right now. Go ahead and ask your question, and most likely we're going to get to your questions at the end, unless Michael wants to stop and go through some questions. But we'll really wait till the end so the presenter can get the material. If you have any questions that are not related to the topic at hand today, I know sometimes people ask about IBM licensing and OpenNTF in general, go to our Slack channel, opentf.slack.org. And also want to have a big shout out to the people who make NTF or OpenNTF possible. HCL has been very, very supportive of our organization, as well as Prominic. Prominic hosts all our servers and everything. So big thank you to both of those organizations, as well as all the many volunteers who help make OpenNTF a reality. Remember, this is a user group. None of us get paid. We're all just doing it to help the community. So speaking of, we'd love for you guys, everyone, to get more involved. You can either contribute projects, you could help with a project, help in testing, documentation. If you have some ideas that you're not quite sure how to do some things with it, we could try to find another volunteer who might be good in that particular area. So if you want to get started and help us out, just go to our Slack channel and say, I want to help, and we'll definitely try to use you. Before we get started, I do have one poll I'm going to do. Since this is an XPages topic, I'd like to, let's get a little handle on where people are using XPages at the moment. So if you could answer that poll, we'll give it a few minutes, and then we'll get started with Michael. We got about 50% voted so far. We'll give it another 30 seconds. Okay, I think we got a pretty good number of you have responded. So let's close the poll, and let me share that. Okay, so it looks like a significant number of people are going to continue developing their applications. So just a good data point. Let me go ahead and let's get started with Michael. I think we're ready.
I'm ready.
You're ready. Hold on, I'm gonna find the right place to click on. Okay, you should be the presenter.
Just make sure I have the right monitor here.
Yes, that's your PowerPoint opening.
Okay, slide. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Howard. Thank you, Jesse and Graham as well. Welcome everybody to Flexible View Control for XPages. My name is Michael G. Smith. I am a, I'm a senior developer with Mutual Boiler Re. We are a reinsurance company specializing in equipment breakdown. However, I was a consultant for many years. I've worked with Domino now for over 20 years. And you can see I do blog occasionally at xpage.me. Some of you may have seen my posts around the flexible view control there. You can also reach me on Twitter. And if you ever want to email me a question about the control, please feel free to do so. I'm always happy to try to help the best I can. So when we talk about the flexible view control, the first question to ask is, what problem are we trying to solve? For me, this control was born out of being very frustrated with trying to add view data to my applications. It seemed very cumbersome. It seemed like whichever type of control you try to use, there were certain limitations one way or the other. And my goal was to try to make something that did not have any limitations for what I needed it to do. So as I set out to build a new view control, I try to keep some basic goals in mind. So the most important thing is to be able to streamline view creation in an XPage. Adding view data should not be painful. You know, we live in a more modern development world. A lot of the things we're hearing from HCL now involve low code. So kind of subconsciously, that was kind of the direction I was headed when I was working on the flexible view control. And also, still want to be able to provide a rich user experience, a rich experience for the user. So many users have been using Notes client applications for many years. As they've been moving into the web space and XPages, they don't want to lose that functionality that they're used to having in the view. So I still wanted to be able to provide that for my users. I wanted to be able to move view management out of the design. So I try to treat my backend views just as simple tables of data. Don't worry about formatting, no bolding, changing the font, adding color columns for rows and text and that type of stuff. Separate logic and data. So if you've used a view control in XPages, your users come back to you, they want you to make a small change. Well, you have to go in there, you have to make the change on the XPage, you have to rebuild the application. And so sometimes you may end up with a longer turnaround time than you want. With the flexible view control, as you can see, we can make instantaneous changes without affecting the design of the application. And then finally, we want to be able to minimize back-end view creation. So we've all been there. You have an application, you're sorting by one field or categorizing by one field. You have a complete another view that has the exact same data and categorizes by a different field. And that's the only difference between the two views. So you have two views, two indexes, and I want to try to eliminate those scenarios. So as you can see there with that bottom bullet point, be creative with indexes. And so as I set out on this journey to create this, I needed to choose which front-end JavaScript table framework to use. So ultimately, I decided on DataTables. I had started using it in some applications and was extremely pleased with the functionality available. I mean, I think to date, I've probably barely scratched the surface of what this library can do. Now, it is can be a pretty heavyweight library, but ultimately, as I was working on applications and thinking, I was trying to do something specific, and I started thinking to myself, I'm going to have to do something custom to make this work. I just needed to keep digging further into the DataTables documentation and realize that they had thought of that already, and there's a fairly simple way to implement that. And then finally, so which UI framework to use? So as you're going to see here in a minute, out of the box, I try to keep things pretty generic so that if you want to integrate this into an application that's not using Bootstrap or whatever, it'll be fairly easy to do that. So we out of those goals that were set, the result was the flexible view control for XPages. So ultimately what I was shooting for was turning something like this into this, or this, or this. So as you can see, that's the same data, different categories, or even this, adding some nifty stuff to the UI. So these series of screenshots that you've just seen, there is one view that is feeding all of these different front-end UI views. So this is an example of taking advantage of the goals that were set out in creating this control. So getting started, what is the flexible view control? So this graphic kind of provides an overview of how everything works here. So you create a Domino view, and then we're going to learn more about this in a minute. View definitions. So view definitions are notes documents that hold the configuration for the views you want to display in XPages with the flexible view control. And then finally, we have our view controls, which sit on an XPage. And ultimately, the view control is going to be using REST services of some sort, the normal Domino REST services. You can use xAgents to pull that Domino back into, or pull that data back into the control. So what is it exactly? So it's a reusable custom control, and you're going to see here in a moment there are several companion resources, script libraries, style sheet, etc., that you can drop into any XPage, or as we're going to do, we're really going to start creating an application from scratch here in a couple minutes. You can use it as a view, like you would a normal Domino view, or an embedded view on a next page somewhere. And in my production application, I use it a lot as a pick list. So the two integral pieces of this are jQuery and DataTables. DataTables is built on jQuery, so by default, the view control is built on that as well. And it's extremely versatile and configurable. And as I'm running through some demos, I'm going to try to demonstrate that for you. And this, as Howard alluded to earlier, I have spent a lot of time on this. It has evolved over the course of 5 years, and as I found myself, as different business requirements came along, the control started expanding, and occasionally I would paint myself into a corner, and then figure out how to make that a little more, flexible, to be honest with you. So the idea is to not have it be for a specific use. I want it to be able to be used in many different ways, and we're going to try to illustrate that. And the final bullet here, this is used in production every day within our organization. As I'm sitting here speaking to you, there are close to 100 people using this in an application. There's probably hundreds of instances of it going on right now, and hundreds of REST service calls to retrieve data. So how to get the code? So I do maintain the project on GitHub, and I do make updates to it periodically. I just created a release a couple days ago after I fixed a few items. In my preparation for this webinar, I did realize there are some other things hanging out there, so I will be making some more updates. And we're going to go through a little tutorial here in a minute on how to import this into Domino Designer. There's also some other tutorials out there, especially if you are using source control. So the theme that is included with the project includes links to a jQuery and DataTables CDN. So you don't have to worry about, we don't package that with the control, but you also don't need to worry about downloading it. But of course, you always have that option if you want to. And then finally, within our organization, we use Bootstrap. When the control was built, it was built around Bootstrap, so I had to kind of peel some of that stuff away to make it a little more generic. So I do include links in the theme to a Bootstrap CDN. So once you download the control and you unzip it, and import it into Designer. So what's actually in the NSF that you're going to create? Well, there's a handful of design elements that are essential for the view control to properly function. So we have a custom control here called CC REST View. This actually, the control was born as CC REST View within our organization. So to me, flexible view control is a little more consumer friendly. So that's why I named it as such as I started blogging and speaking about it. But within our organization, and when we refer to it internally, we call it CC REST View. I do include a REST Services XPage, which is just a very simple. There's one REST service on there out of the box, and we'll see that in a minute. There are a couple script libraries. There's a lot of client-side code. There's a little bit of server-side code. And the enable AMD, disable AMD are for jQuery and DataTables because they both use AMD. And we do have a style sheet and a theme as we referred to earlier. And there's a view here for view definitions. Again, we're going to be going over all this in a moment. And there are other handful of design elements which are simply ancillary there to kind of support things in the back end. There is a CC nav custom control that I include to kind of make it easy to navigate through a couple of the elements as you're getting things set up. Okay, so let's start configuring the view control. So I'm going to go through what you need to do to import it into Designer. I've already done that, so I'm not going to do that live. But one note at the beginning of this configuration here is, if you have already downloaded the control, and this applies to any project you download from GitHub or wherever, and you're importing into Designer, it needs a unique name. So if you've downloaded it and imported it previously into Designer, you just need to update a couple files in order to not have Designer scream nasty things at you when you try to import it. And that's what I refer to here. If you have not downloaded it previously, or if you have updated these files, then really it's fairly simple. So in Designer, you go to your navigator pane. You're just going to right click and choose import existing projects into workspace. You're going to find where you downloaded the zip and unzipped it. And it's important that you import the ODP directory. That's where all of the design elements are. And then finally, you're going to finish. So you're going to have the project imported into your navigator pane. Now you need to turn it into an NSF. And you do that by right-clicking, choosing team development, and associate with a new NSF. And at that point, you're going to choose your server, your database title, and your path and all that stuff. So now you have an NSF in Designer. So you need to update the ACL. You need to build the project because what you've downloaded has been built by me and probably will not work. And then now we're actually going to start configuring the control. So as you can see here, as I've highlighted in yellow, the first thing you have to do once you have this NSF set up is you have to open the admin config XSP. And I'm going to do that now. So you should see that on my screen. So nothing terribly exciting here, just some fairly basic information that the control uses in the back end. And then after we do that, and we're going to run through that in a minute, we have to create the first view definition. So again, the control will not work until we complete this step. The fields that are on this configuration document, REST service path. So this is if you want to store your REST services in a database outside of the current one you're working in, this is where you would denote that. That's something that we do internally. We maintain our REST services completely separate from our XPage code. And then you can provide a list of servers where basically where your Domino data is. So if it's the current server, great. You don't really need to do anything. But sometimes you might have data sitting on another server that you want to pull from. And then finally, you're going to tell the view control what databases are available for it to find views in. And so we're going to create this config doc here. And as maybe you saw on the last slide, there can be only one. Like the Highlander, I've been using that joke for I think 30 years now. So really, it's pretty simple. So in what we're doing today, and actually my screenshot is incorrect here. So my REST services are in the current database, so I'm going to leave this blank. I'm going to be working on the current server, so I'm going to leave that blank. But I do have a database I'm going to be using for demonstrations today. And again, if you've seen any of my blog posts, it's the same one I've been using. It's a used car database. It has over 2 million records in it. And that is what we are going to be using today. So the format here is as such. And I don't remember if it's 1/ or 2/, so we'll find out in a minute. So I'm going to save that, and nothing happens, and that's okay. That's typically a good thing because that means our config doc has been created. So let me verify that. Oh, looks like I got logged out. Let me get logged back in for a minute. We have single sign-on set up, and every once in a while I get bounced out. Okay, I've got my config doc here. So this is the actual view control database that we downloaded. So pretty basic stuff here in the beginning. So we do have a view of view definitions. There's nothing in there. And we have a view that stores our configuration documents. So that is what we just created, this document here. So now the next thing I need to do is create the first view definition. And the first view definition is just the view definition to display all the other view definitions. So it's kind of a weird circular reference there, but so I click that button, and again, our UI right now is pretty generic, and that was done again intentionally. So so what fields do we need to focus on here? So let me bring our presentation back up. You see we have our configuration document. We've clicked on create view definition, and so we have our new view definition in front of us. So we're going to start talking about view definitions now. So view definitions are probably the most important piece of the flexible view control. So as you can see in this little quote here, view definitions act as the wiring for the flexible view control, instructing it where to retrieve data from and how that data should be formatted and displayed. So view definition documents are where this allows us to move the design of our views out of the actual view design element and into a notes document that we can then reference and make changes to without rebuilding the application. And again, just re-upping this graphic here, view definitions here in the middle play the most important role. And this is just kind of like another way of looking at it here. So one view can be represented multiple times with different column orders, sorting, and Excuse me. Sorry about that. So as you can see in this little graphic here, we have one Domino view, 3 different view definitions created from it, feeding 3 different controls. So the idea would be these controls would be displaying data in a different way. And anytime a view is displayed with a flexible view control, it needs to point to a view definition. So I'm kind of being a little redundant here in some of the things I'm saying, and that's on purpose. I think one of the things I'll focus on as I'm making improvements to the control is to improve the configuration process. I think there's been a few people that have downloaded it and had a little trouble getting started. So that's why I'm just being very redundant in this. So before creating view definitions that point to your data, we have to create the first one. And here's what we're going to do. So we're going to live here create this view definition as you see here. Very important, it should be called view definitions. And we'll talk more about all of the fields and options here as we move through some different demos. So what I'm telling the view definition here is anytime when you're displaying this view and you open a document, this is the X page that you want to be displayed. So you can see we selected the current database and we pointed it to the view definitions view. And so when you do that, you get a list of, so it goes out and interrogates a view, you get a list of the columns that are available. So the column title gets pulled in, the item name, and of course there's a lot of formatting options here, which we will play with momentarily. But I'm going to go ahead and select all of these columns, except the last one. So looking at my notes here, another important option here is load on init. So when this is checked off, when this control is on a page that gets loaded, it's going to try to load the view right away. When this is not checked, it essentially waits for manual initialization of the view, and we will try to demonstrate that. But for right now, I am going to choose load on init. I'm going to click save. This has kicked me over to the view definitions view. Again, very rudimentary UI going on right now, but we do have a document here. So what you're actually seeing the view control in action right now. So the underlying X page here, admin view definitions, has the control on it, and it is pointing to the view definitions view definition. It's a bit of a mouthful there. So I can open this again. You can see it pointed to this X page. And my little helpful navigator here, I can get back to the view definitions. Okay, we have a fully functional view control. So about the UI, the UI left intentionally generic. If you have worked with data tables before, you may be aware of some of the styling options. It has a pretty standard kind of jQuery-ish kind of UI out of the box. It does have a Bootstrap specific UI. Even though we use Bootstrap in our organization, I use the default DataTables UI, and that's what we're going to use here. But it does support some other UI frameworks as well. Check out the DataTables website to check those out. So as I mentioned before, there are links to Bootstrap in the theme. And I'm actually going to enable those now.
Michael, just while you're doing this, curious, what version of Domino are you running?
This server I'm working on right now is 10.01 and FixPack 4 or 5. The control was developed on 9.01, and we're going to be standing up an 11 server soon, so I'll be test driving on there, but I don't anticipate problems in any of these versions, specifically because the server-side component of this is pretty basic.
Thanks.
Sure, no problem. So I'm just going to enable these Bootstrap resources here. Save that, come back to my view. I don't need to build, so now I have a Bootstrap UI. So just something I want to touch on real quick, which is integral to the control in the way it displays, is I use Flexbox to create flexible layouts. Before I discovered Flexbox, I was, especially if the view, I wanted to fill up the entire screen, I had to, and part of it is the way we develop internally, and that's a different story, but I did a lot of computation of the viewport heights and widths and that type of stuff, and I wanted to get away with that. And once I discovered Flexbox and became more comfortable with that, it completely changed my life. So you can see here, and this is the actual view definitions XPage. We set some classes here to kind of create the layout we're looking for. So this is what allows this view to kind of spread out and fill up the entire screen here. So we still have our footer at the bottom. There's only one document in the view, so it's not, doesn't need to scroll. But as you see, when we're looking at views with larger numbers of documents, all this stuff will stay in place, the header will stay in place, and we'll be able to scroll the body. So again, with considering the time we have, I didn't want to dwell too much on certain things. I want to try to focus on the important things, but I did just want to mention Flexbox and how integral it is to the layout of the control. So I did blog about this, so feel free to check that out to get some more information. And I highly suggest playing with it if you haven't, just to make your applications better and make it easier to create layouts. So let's talk a little bit about how the control works. So you have your application, you're starting out with an XPage. You drag the control in. This is actually what the control looks like. So you can see it's pretty basic. We have a table there and a script block and a field that is bound to, it is actually bound to a view scope based on a composite data value, which we'll see in a minute. So the control has many custom properties. So this is, again, where the flexible piece comes into this is, and this is how it started pretty small with a basic set of properties. And again, as business needs evolved and emerged, properties get added. Sometimes I'd have to rip things out completely and kind of start from square one. The most important property here is this one down here called this view, and that refers to the current control. So this is what allows a user to, you could have 2 view controls, 5, however many you want on a particular page. So we have our custom control from a server-side standpoint, in the after page load event, we initialize the view definition. So what it does, it goes out, it finds that view definition document, reads it, brings the information in, and holds it in a view scope, and it makes it available. And then, of course, we have the script block on there. So the way I would describe the view control is a little tiny bit of server-side code and a lot of client-side code. So, and that's where the script block comes in. So within the script block, we are creating an object, I call it a view object. And again, it's specific to each control. As you can see, at runtime, we are taking this view parameter out of the custom properties and creating a variable. The next most important piece here is inside of this object we're creating is a function called build. This is where all of the heavy lifting happens. This is where DataTables is getting initialized. So you can see we have a little bit of a hierarchy developing here. So we have our view object. Inside that, we have our build function. And then our build function is initializing DataTables. And part of that is going out and retrieving the data. So DataTables has an Ajax component built into it, and we tap into that. And you can see based on the URL we're building there that there's nothing hard-coded. We're using all variables to build where we're going to go get that information from. Now, DataTables also supports feeding it the data from outside of DataTables, meaning maybe you have an Ajax call that goes and gets the data and you want to feed that into DataTables. I don't have that set up yet for the control, but that's definitely on the list of future things to do. So again, the DataTables initialization, it's retrieving the data. It's going through its callbacks. If you're familiar with DataTables, you know what I mean there, but we'll try to touch on that. So when the init complete callback is done, we know that the data has been fully loaded. That's where the layout is getting adjusted. That's where the view control is creating the categories, totals, averages, and that type of stuff. And then finally, as part of the callback sequence, this is where we can bind events. So we can use the callbacks that DataTables makes available to create click events, double click events, and that type of stuff. So just a quick DataTables primer for those who are not familiar with it. So again, we're talking about callbacks. To me, there's similarities between the DataTables callbacks and the XPages lifecycle. So we're probably all used to that XPages lifecycle. You can see here in the screenshot from the console, I did a presentation at MWLUG a few years ago where I focused just on DataTables, and I kind of pulled this out of that for this slide to show what callbacks happen as the table is being initialized. So you can see the created row and the row callback. That's for each record in the data set. And just this screenshot is to show kind of some of the terms that we may be using today. So a big part of having a table with a lot of data is you want a fixed header, and users don't like to scroll and then not be able to see what the column titles are. And then we have a filter up here, and then we have our fixed footer at the bottom, and then inside of the footer is in DataTables terminology is the info. So what the control does when it is building each row is it is adding the doc ID as a class to make it easy to reference it if you need to. And you see we'll be, as we add our own callbacks, we'll be adding some additional information, but this is kind of like out of the box. And same with the cells here. So whatever your item name is that you're feeding into the control for a particular column, it's going to add that to the cell. And that's what this refers to here. All right, so now we're going to actually start building some stuff. So I'm going to try to get through as much as I can. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. So hopefully I've gone through all these already. So hopefully I can do it again without making a mistake. But I'd say those chances are probably pretty low. So the first thing I'm going to start with is just a basic demo here. So we move over to Designer. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is create a view definition called View Basic. If you are calling a REST service that has the same name as the view definition, you do not need to specify this field. But I have an X page called REST Services, which is where my REST service is. I'm not going to worry about opening an X page right now. Data table class. So this is if I wanted to give my table an additional class, this is where I could do that. I'm not going to worry about the sorting stuff yet. I'm going to click load on init, current server, I use car database, and I'm going to choose the XSP SUV view. So again, we get all of our columns here that are in the view. And one of my list of to-dos is to add a select all button to select all the columns or have them selected automatically when they come in. So as I mentioned before, within your view, you want to try to avoid worrying about having to format the data as much as possible. So the view definition gives you some options here to format data. So for mileage, for example, I want this to display as a number, so it's properly formatted. So if it's 10,000, I want it to be 10,000. Price, I want to display as currency. And so this is about the most basic view definition that we can create. So we're going to come back and play with some of these options in a minute, but right now I just want to create this. So I have my view definition here, view basic. I'm going to pop back into Designer. I'm going to make a copy of my view definitions X page. I'm going to call it view basic. And to configure it, come down to the custom properties. And again, there's a whole slew of properties, and we're gonna fiddle with these a little bit so you can kind of see what they do. Right now, we're kind of just working out of the box. So since I copied the view definitions X page, I need to change my view key to point to this new view definition I just created. That's what the view key parameter does. And I documented this stuff on my blog previously. So again, I'm trying to work through things fairly quickly here. So this view, I'm going to call it view basic. I could have left it as view definitions, but that would be a little misleading. So some of the other parameters here that are kind of exist by default. So show fixed header, I have set to true. Show footer true, show info, etc. So these are defaults, and you'll see what happens if we turn some of those off in a minute. So a couple other important parameters here. We could supply a key here. So if we have a large view, we know we only want to display a subset of that view, we could supply that here. And if your view is categorized, you could just tell it that yes, it is a category. So I'm going to leave this as it is. Let me make sure I have my view basic REST service. I did cheat a little bit and leave some REST services here. Okay, I do have a view basic REST service. And I do have it pointing to the view that I defined in the view definition. So I should be good to go. Did I build? Yes, I did. Okay, so this view contains Chevy Tahoes and Ford Explorers. And the REST service was set to a maximum of 1,000, so we only got 1,000 records, but you can kind of see how easy it is to point to data and get a nice looking view in your application. So let's go back to the view definition and start playing with some of these parameters. So, oops. So the column titles are completely overridable. So it brings in the default that's in the view, but you have the ability to change that without altering the view. You can see the year reflects that change. So what about sorting? So the great thing about the view control is, let's say you add a new column to your view and you want to sort by that column. You don't have to move it to the front of your view. You can leave the columns where they are. All of the sorting is going to be done in the front end. So and these columns can be dragged and dropped. So again, I clicked on the wrong one. So let's say I want to move the make to the front here. By default, the view will sort in the order that the data comes in from the REST service, but obviously you probably don't always want to do that. So to signify to the column you want to sort, you provide that in this field here, and you do ascending, descending. So to do this, you use the item name. So I want to, since I moved the make column to the front, I want to sort by that column. So now all my Chevys are in front, and all my Fords are in the back. Of course, I can do that descending. What if I then want to sort by year? I can do that. So you can see we have the oldest cars showing up first there. So so some of the other options here, of course, you can define some column widths here. The thing with data tables doesn't always give you that precise number. Data tables does kind of like its own layout of the columns based on the data that's inside them. So, but if I wanted to mess around with this and give this something absurd, you can see my column gets bigger there. Hide overflow, the purpose of that is if you have a column value that's really long and you want it truncated, it'll put an ellipsis in there for you. Style, we could define a class. So this probably should say class and not style, but I could put a custom class here and define that in my CSS and have that apply to this particular column. You can see I can do right justification here. Now, in my application, I actually use Font Awesome and use icons to denote certain things. So it's pretty easy to integrate that if you want to. You can see now I'm right justifying there. I could hide a column. So I'm going to hide ID. Poof, it's gone. Sortable, this is actually not functional at the moment. I'm working on the ability to individually make columns not sortable. And then we have average and total columns. I think these need a little work at the moment. And then finally, let's do some categorization here. So let me bring my ID column back. So now I want to categorize by make. So when I categorize a column, typically I'm going to want to make it a hidden column. Otherwise, well, let me leave it all first so you can see what happens. So you see we now are categorizing based on the make. So as far as the icon is concerned here, by default, I'm using the Bootstrap glyphicons, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but there are some hooks in the code where if you wanted to use your own icons here, again, inside of my application, I use Font Awesome. All right, so there we go. We could do a second level of categorization here, but I'm going to move on. Try to make the most of the time here. Let's see, demonstrate. So let's take a look at some of the custom properties that come with the control. Let's see here. I'm going to turn the fixed header off. So now, once I scroll, I lose my header and my footer for that matter. So by nature, turning off the fixed header removes that scroll body part of the HTML there. So turn that back on. Another important property here is the data table class. So this is a required property, and you tend to want to make it unique, again, because internally the code will refer to that at some point. The control has hooks to provide custom callbacks to feed into data tables. So you can see here we have draw callback. A big one is row callback. So row callback is where you're going to add your click events, your double click events, and that type of stuff. So you can see here the way I'm feeding it in here is without any parameters or anything. That's because this is going to be called and built dynamically, and we'll take a look at that here. And it's going to have the parameters fed automatically. So you see this is our init complete callback. We're kind of doing a lot of work here once the table's done loading. And so for row callback, the only thing we're doing here is we're referring to the custom row callback that's supplied, if it's supplied. So when this is rendered, since we don't have quotes around this, it doesn't see it as a string. It's going to just create a nice function for us, or a function call, and it's going to pass these parameters in to the function. And so if we take a look at that, my designer has slowed down because I've been hammering the hell out of it. So with the control, I package a default row callback, which gives a click and a double click. So let's take a look at that. So every time DataTables is processing a row of data, it is calling this function. So we're doing a couple things. We're adding an attribute to the row, which we can see here. So here's our row. Even though we have the doc ID as a class, we also add it as a parameter to make it easily accessible. We have a click event, and this click event will take into account multiple selection. And then we have a double click event. So we referenced if we supply an XPage to a view definition, you can then use your double click event to try to open that. Let me try to get to something else here. Row callback. So we talked about the build function and how that function does the heavy lifting. So let's try to quickly demonstrate the power of that. So I'm going to create something new here. I'm going to copy this view basic. Okay, so I'm going to create another view definition. Called view build. I have a REST service already created called view all. REST services XPage. And so I have a view here, XSP all. This has all 2 million records in it. And for the sake of time, I'm gonna, unfortunately, my columns don't currently have column titles, so I'm gonna leave those blank for now. And I'm not gonna worry about opening an XPage. I'm going to set it to, I'm actually going to leave load on init off because we're going to build it manually. I want my view build view definition. I can still call view basic, that's fine. I'm going to leave everything else as it is. I'm going to turn the fixed headers back on. Actually, I am going to supply a default key. So this XSP all view that I'm pointing at is a categorized view. And just to give you a glimpse of what it looks like, you can see I have a categorized view. I use a couple different ways to categorize it. So for this example, I'm going to pull up all of the used cars in Albany, any city named Albany. Okay, let's hope I got that right. Got something wrong. What was it? Well, I said I was going to build it manually, and I didn't set that up yet. I'm stupidly expecting the view to show up, so we have to tell it to show up. Even though I built the control, I make these mistakes all the time. So I'm going to create another button here. And I'm going to get rid of this client-side code here. And I believe it's still called. So when you refer to the view object, you're using that value you put into this view parameter. And I'm just going to call build. That's all I need to do to bring up the view. So you see there's 2,109 used vehicles in cities named Albany around the country in various states. So the next thing I want to do is show how using that build command, we can change this on the fly. In fact, I can completely change the data that I'm loading in here. So we know we're hitting a categorized view. So by simply providing, let me see here, what did well, let's do City of Wilmington for right now. I'm going to pick a different city. Now I'm going to show all of the data, all of the cars in any city named Wilmington. So again, I've got my Albany data. As you can see, this is loading kind of slow. We have, over 2,000 records, so that's kind of to be expected. You have the server that needs to get the data. You need to get it across the wire, and then your data tables. There's a lot of processing involved, and we're going to show you how we slow that down or speed that up momentarily. So I've got my Albany data here, but I want this view to show the city of Wilmington. So by simply changing the category and passing it into the build function, I can completely change the data that appears in the view. Okay, moving on to the next. Okay, so so far, we've created a couple individual XPages that have pointed to a couple individual REST services. But typically, in a production scenario, you don't want to just creating new XPages again and again and again, especially if you're using it just to display a view. So, for example, in our application, we'll have one XPage that is used simply to serve all view data for a particular department or something like that. So let's see how we can do that here. So I'm going to create another XPage. So what I want to do here is, instead of hard coding a view definition name in here, I actually want to retrieve it from the URL. And I'm just going to call this view. And the same with the key. I don't want to hard code it. I want to be able to provide my own key via the URL or whatever method you want to use. I want to use my view build view definition, and I want to show Ferraris. Ah. Whoops. I love spelling mistakes. Let's take a look here. View dynamic. Again, be sure. This is certainly user error of some sort here.
Hey, Mike, someone said you might want to try the question mark in your URL parameters.
Yeah, that would probably help. Ta-da. So let me go back to, no, actually I need to, actually need to create that view definition. View build. I apologize for making everybody wallow in me creating view definitions here, but I wanted to give it some authenticity and not have them preloaded. Like I said, I still make many mistakes when I'm doing this. So.
Hey, Mike, when you get done with this part of the demo, if you want to, maybe we should move on to questions. We're at 12 minutes after the hour.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, is it possible I can move on to another quick one real quick?
Yeah, we have
have
about 15 minutes left.
Okay. I'll just show something real quick, and there is, DataTables has something called renderers. And actually, well, I think we're probably not going to have enough time, but if you check out my blog, I've covered it on there at some point. There's a demo I had wanted to get to that I haven't been able to get to, which kind of highlights some of the power of using renderers in DataTables. So what I'll do is I'll work that into the demo database I have online that I use and that I reference in my blog posts. So we only scratched the surface today, so I would just say stay tuned. I'm always looking for interesting ways to demonstrate the view control online. And I'll be happy to turn it over to questions now, Howard.
Oh, thanks. I got a question. This is actually from me. When you set this up, do you keep this separate NSF, or do you copy all those designs into your NSF that has your other XPages and design elements?
It depends. You can do whatever you want. I mean, out of the box, it is set up where they're contained in the same database as your XPages. But again, that might be something I could look to make a configurable option of where you want to store your view definitions.
Okay. Graham, do you have some questions queued up?
Yep. Let's jump in. We got a few questions. In fact, more than one person on the webinar has asked about a open sourced copy of your data, your used cars database. Have you posted that on your blog, or is that something that you share?
I'm happy to share it. I mean, I got it from a website called, I think it's Kaggle, Kaggle. It's a website that actually has a lot of great, I believe it's open source data. The only reason why I haven't posted is because there's over 2 million records, and I think the text files that I used to import were pretty big. So I'm happy to do it. I just haven't done it. I might be able to post it on a Dropbox. the used car database actually has the agents in it so that if you have the text files, you can run the agents to import the data.
Cool.
That's probably easier than just
actually,
making the database itself available.
Yeah, 2 million records. I imagine that'll make it kind of big.
I don't know if we have a size limit on OpenNTF, because I know some of the projects are just sample data. I think there's like a name,
right.
So that might be an option, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to share it however I can. So there's certainly nothing proprietary in there. I think I'd have to check what the Kaggle license says for redistribution. But again, I could provide the design and you could get the files from them and you're off and running.
Yeah, I think we do, everything we do has to be, well, Jesse can help. I think that has to be under a certain type of open source license.
Okay, next question. Is it possible to use the control multiple times on one X page? I know from a performance standpoint, and that's actually leading to the next question, but I saw some slow performance, but would you potentially build a dashboard that would use the view control multiple times on the same X page?
Absolutely, and I do that currently. So again, that's where the power of the build command can come in, especially because we do a lot of having separate views on different tabs. So we don't want to load the view until that tab becomes visible. And so that allows you to delay loading of the view until you actually click on that tab. But we also have pages which act as a dashboard and have, I think we have one that has as many as 4 views on it. And the actual performance of the control is very good. What you're seeing here is might be an effect of my VPN, number one. Number two, loading thousands of records. And I didn't get a chance to demonstrate something. And while you're talking, I actually think I can do that. That will help speed that up. So the answer to the question is yes. And I do it every day in our application.
Cool.
Mike, if you want to show something, just to FYI, I'm the presenter now.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, again, if you what I was going to show is there's a parameter for the control called scroller, which uses a plugin for data tables called Scroller. And what that does is you could download you could import thousands of records, but it's only going to render however many can fit in the viewport. So I have a blog post out there which demonstrates what a difference that makes performance-wise.
Michael, do you support the server-side processing that DataTables has, where it just requests X number of records at a time instead of?
I do. It's not specifically tied into the DataTables processing, because I think theirs really kind of focuses on PHP, if I'm not mistaken. But there is a component as part of the scroller parameter. There's a kind of like a brother parameter to that called scroller count. And basically what you're telling the control is only get this many at a time, but it is going to keep loading data in the background. But I mean, that's also something you can easily build in. So I guess from my standpoint, in our business, it hasn't become an issue yet where I've had to focus on it. So I haven't put that much energy into that part. But yeah, I mean, I would like to get there and make that piece of the control much more robust, where we have more control over that.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question was, Jose wants to know, in the view definition, what's the difference between hiding a column and removing the checkbox?
When you remove the checkbox, the data is not going to get loaded into data tables. When it's just set as hidden, data table still has a handle on that column. It's just not displaying it. And that can come in handy if you want to be able to search for something and not have that column visible. So, there might be, especially if you have a large table, and there's a particular column that you're not displaying for users, but you can still give them the ability to search on that column.
Okay, next question. More of a comment, but I'll turn it into a question. So there was a comment about another person on the webinar here that has played around and used Dojo Grid with reasonably good success. So curious about, or I'll ask the question just in terms of comparing sort of your journey to coming up with the solution that you did and other options that you've tried or potentially discarded.
Yeah, to be honest, I really didn't look at anything else. You know, once I started using data tables, I was drawn to it based on the UI of it, and I just kind of stuck with it and started drinking the Kool-Aid. And I haven't found a reason to work with anything else yet. So, given the
It gives you
time, I
what
would
you
love
want.
to explore that. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I say it gives you what you need.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, a couple more questions here. Subtotals. So well, in this particular, the question says, can we subtotal a salary column based on the category item depot?
The answer is yes. I think there might be a couple bugs in there right now that I need to work out. But yes, you can do that. I do actually do that in our production application. But yeah, that's the purpose of that.
Awesome. And last question, integration with non-Domino data, potentially relational database data. Have you ever tried to do integration with other data sources?
That's a great question, and I have a slide that's further down in the deck titled "Future Plans," and that is definitely something I would like to look at. Being able to bring in data from outside Domino, being able in the view definition to create your own. I mean, basically, kind of like a free form. And that view, those columns, the actual definition behind the scenes is stored as JSON. So in the view definition, I'll just need to provide the ability to maybe freeform some JSON to define the columns and be able to point to resources outside of Domino. It would be a REST URL, for example. But yes, that is definitely something I'm interested in implementing in the control.
Cool.
Question for you. I noticed, so basically, you're never referencing the view directly. You're going through a REST service somewhere. Is that correct?
Yes, the REST service references the view, but as far as the control itself, it is not. It is only referencing the view definition. And really, when you're creating the view definition and you're pointing to a view, it's only to pull in what columns are there. Once you've done that, you really don't need any kind of connection to the view. However, if I make a change to that view and go into the view definition, it'll tell me, hey, the columns have changed. Do you want to make any changes? But yeah, once you've created that view definition, it's really just relying on the whatever REST service method you use, whether it's a basic REST service or an xAgent or whatever, to talk to that view and get the data.
Okay. I think that wraps it up. We just had a very quick comment here from Bob that said he has used both Dojo Grid and data tables and prefers the UI of data tables. So good feedback from the community. Thanks, Bob. And that's it. So Howard, you can wrap it up.
Sure thing. Well, I'd like to thank Michael for taking his time to present this. It looks like you've also spent a lot of time in building this. And it's definitely something that's pretty usable and definitely an improvement on standard views in XPages. And also like to thank Graham and Jesse for co-hosting the webinar with me today. We are working on the November webinar, and we'll send out an email as well as post on OpenNTF when we got that figured out. So with that, I'd like to wish everyone a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you, everybody, for watching.